When Clear Lake took over, we were third in the league. We were European champions, only for a few more days because it was before we'd won it the year before.
Yeah.
And Arsenal, who last night got to a Champions League final, were fifth, and they hadn't been in the Champions League for 6 years. It's been 4 years since then. Chelsea have spent more money than anyone in football, and we are ninth. They're in a Champions League final and are 3 games away from winning the Premier League. Yeah, it feels like the lowest point, I think, for this ownership. I know a lot of people go back to 3 years ago where we were 12th in the league and stuff, and there's a lot of debate on Twitter about which one's worse, I think, from a fan perspective. But I think when you look at what happened in that season, I think there was a lot of upheaval. The squad rebuild was starting, and, the ownership had just come in. It was very fresh. They were getting used to the surroundings. There was still a lot of hangover from what was a very sort of tense couple months where Chelsea was sanctioned and the sale had to go through to a certain time. Todd Boehly was the sporting director that summer, and then that season we hired Potter, and then the sporting directors came after Potter was hired, and then he left and Lampard came in. So there was a lot of things that weren't going Chelsea's way, but what you've seen the last month is something that this ownership have built collapsing. Like, when they took over, when Clear Lake took over, we were third in the league. We were European champions, only for a few more days because it was before we'd won it the year before.
Yeah.
And Arsenal, who last night got to a Champions League final, were fifth, and they hadn't been in the Champions League for 6 years. It's been 4 years since then. Chelsea have spent more money than anyone in football, and we are ninth. They're in a Champions League final and are 3 games away from winning the Premier League. That is, I think, the biggest indictment on this ownership, because what you could look back on in that season of 22-23 was you can look back on, like, there was a lot of chaos going on. The directors were hired in like December of that season, so there was a lot of shit going on, as I said a little bit ago. When Stanley and Stewart did an interview with Matt Law that I don't know if I've cited on the podcast before, but I've cited on my socials, where they said that it's October 2024, so about 18 months ago. And what they said was, it has taken the last 4 transfer windows, 3 permanent managers during that time, and an unparalleled turnover of players for Chelsea to reach a position where supporters can see the club emerging from the chaos of the past 2 years in a healthy position. That was Matt Law. And what Stanley Stewart said, when there's the changes that have happened, new ownership, and what we walked into, you were always going to get some turbulence in the middle. There's been some changes here, staff, players, and then you get the upward trajectory. And that's the place that we feel like we're in at the moment. So at that moment in time, that was like the best run of form under Maresca, first half of his full season here, first half of last season. And they felt like they'd come out of that chaos of 22-23, 23-24, Turpoch, all that stuff. And we've now sunk back to where we were before that. Like, there's nowhere else kind of to run, I think, for this ownership anymore. And I'm not going to spend this podcast naming names or anything like that, because I think nobody really knows who's got how much power everyone has in that room. So you kind of have to blame all of them at once. But I cannot believe, because we're going to talk about how to fix Chelsea, I cannot believe that we are genuinely going into this summer not hearing anything about changes structurally from a sporting perspective. I'm not saying sack this guy, sack that guy, or whatever, but 18 months ago you said you emerged from the chaos. What's this? Like, and that's where I sit right now, is I can't remember the last time I hated this club this much. And that sounds quite dramatic. I don't hate the badge, I just hate what this club is right now. There's not many players I like, don't like the ownership, don't like the direction the club's going. This summer's going to be brutal. So to be perfectly honest, I said this on Twitter today, I was thinking about it. I feel like we just need 1920 all over again. I feel like we need to not buy any players and just give the kids some minutes, get in a coach that's going to play them, and have a free hit of a season where,